Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me for another inner hour this week. Appreciate it. For those of you in the local area, it's a little chilly out tonight, and we have snow, so Annie and I are excited about that. Maybe not everybody is, but we are. And so thanks for being here. I'm going to do our candle lighting, and then we'll get into the rest of the program this evening. If you haven't done so yet, just take a moment as I light our candle and light your candle, whether you do it physically or inside. Just take a moment and let go of the day, and we're at the end of the week and the beginning of Shabbat for those of you who practice that. So just time to move into a period of rest, resting in the spirit and in that presence within us. So, all right. Some of you have heard Annie live programs joke around about her job is to make tea. She did. So I have a lovely cup of warm tea here. All right. So for those of you in the Fort Wayne area, I'm going to be the guest speaker at Unity this Sunday. Service is at 10:30, so you're welcome to join us for that if you can get to it. And as I would usually add, those of you who want to fly in, go ahead and book your flights so you can get here tomorrow. Anyway, tonight's something a little different, and it's still going to be me reading some things to you and sharing my take on it. But and it is thematic again, but this one is going to be mostly a non-biblical text. So I'm going to start with some biblical references, and then we'll move on from there. So here's a couple of excerpts from the New Testament, and you'll catch this real quickly here. But so the first one is from Matthew 27:55, and it's part of the story of the crucifixion of Yeshua when Jesus was being crucified on the cross. Many of the women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Yeshua. Well, it says Jesus, of course. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among the women were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and Mary the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Then in Matthew 28, this is after he's been buried in the tomb. They come back Sunday morning, find the empty tomb, part of that story. This is Matthew 28. And after Sabbath, as it began to approach dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to the tomb. This is Mark 15:40, describing the same scene, different gospel. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph and James, were there. Mark 16. In the early morning hours of Shabbat, after Shabbat was over, this would have been Sunday morning in our frame of reference, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices to the tomb so that they might anoint his body. And also back to the crucifixion itself, in a different gospel, the Gospel of John 19:25, it said, "At the foot of the cross stood his mother Mary, her sister Mary, and Mary Magdalene." And then from also the Gospel of John, about after the crucifixion, he says that Mary Magdalene was the first one to arrive at the empty tomb, and that Jesus appeared to her, and then she went and recounted that to the disciples. So in John 20:18, it says, Mary Magdalene announced to the disciples after having been at the tomb, "I have seen the Lord." And then she said the things that he told her. So those are all from the Bible. So one of the things that you'll notice about that is that Mary Magdalene is present in all of those accounts, both watching the crucifixion at the foot of the cross after he's dead, and the first one in John's account, the only one, but in all the rest of the accounts, other women were there too. But if you notice something interesting about that list, the list of the list of all these names, including Mary Magdalene, whose name appears first every single time? Mary Magdalene. Now, in that era, if you were listing people on a historical record, in a letter, in a story of some kind, if you were listing people, it went from kind of the head of the table to the foot of the table, so to speak. It went from the most important person to the lesser important people. So whoever, if you're reading these kind of first century accounts, whether they're letters or history or whatever it might be, and there's a list of people, unless it's a genealogy list, the list of people, the person considered most important is at the first of that list. And at the first of every single one of these lists, and many others in the New Testament that didn't have to do with his death, Mary Magdalene is listed first among people, among the women, even when there are male disciples there. And I want to point out something that is really easy to miss. So in this text, it's the Matthew text where they're watching the crucifixion. Among them was Mary Magdalene, so she's first again. Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, or Yosef, sometimes it's written in the New Testament. So who is this Mary, the mother of James and the mother of Joseph? Guess whose brothers were listed in the New Testament, the brothers of Jesus, James, who took over the movement after he died, and his younger brother, Joseph. Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, is his mother. And she's listed after Mary Magdalene in this list. And then the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Who are they? That's John, the son of Zebedee, and a different James, the son of Zebedee, who were both sons of this man who owned a large fishing fleet on the Sea of Galilee, Zebedee. John and James became apostles of Jesus among the 12. So we have Mary Magdalene listed first among all of them, then Jesus' own mother, and then the mother of the children of Zebedee, the apostles James and John, not the brother James. So she was a very big deal in that era that's very easy for us to miss. One of the accounts we have of Mary Magdalene's life from the Catholic Church is that she was a reformed prostitute, and that Jesus basically reformed her. There's absolutely no historical reference to that anywhere in any writings about Mary Magdalene. And there is also none in the New Testament. It was a completely invented story by Pope Gregory to disparage women in positions of authority, because Mary Magdalene was clearly in a position of authority in the lifetime of Yeshua and his apostles. And a completely invented story. It's not in the Bible, it's not in any historical documents. So, first of all, that part was just made up, if you've heard that over the years. So second of all, it says here that she's listed as being number one, even above his mother. So that's a position of some status. So that would indicate one of several possibilities. One, that she was just very well known and very famous, very renowned. More than likely, that renown came from one of two things, and they're not mutually exclusive. One is that she was actually Yeshua's wife, which is why she is listed right after him in all the lists and before everybody else, including his mother. There are a number of historians with that viewpoint now from other documentation outside the New Testament that might indicate that. One of which is a Gnostic gospel called the Gospel of Philip, in which it says Yeshua loved Mary Magdalene more than anyone else and used to kiss her often. Actually, it's kind of funny because the parchment from the scroll says used to kiss her often on the, and there's a hole in the parchment. So on what? On Tuesdays, on her elbow, on her mouth. We don't know, but it's kind of amusing historically that one word is now missing from the text. The other possibility of her being in this kind of elevated status was that she was chief among the apostles, because even when she's listed with the men apostles, she's listed first. Her being a chief apostle, for example, now is kind of unheard of in the traditional churches, but women were a very important part of Yeshua's ministry, even of Paul's ministry, who is not exactly somebody who put women on a pedestal. But women actually did have positions of authority in the early Jesus movement. And so it's not unlikely that she was an apostle at all, or maybe leader of the apostles, or that if she was his wife, somehow they looked up to her as a co-authority kind of a figure. Another interesting thing lending itself toward that interpretation is that the name Magdala was not a name. So Mary, which is also not a Hebrew name, it's Miriam in Hebrew. Miriam, Magdala was not a name. So there's some speculation that she may have been from a small fishing village that might have been called Magdala. Kind of iffy historically and archaeologically, but maybe. But another thing that we know for sure is that Migdal, which is the root word of Magdala, Migdal in Hebrew means tower. So, and as you know, or probably know, Yeshua was fond of giving his apostles nicknames like Peter Cephas, or Simon Peter. Peter being the English version of the Greek Cephas, meaning rock, that he was the rock of the apostles. Or he called James and John sons of thunder because of their egos and hot tempers. So he may well have called Magdala something. And Migdal, tower, would again indicate a very upright, a very towering, powerful figure among his followers. So Mary Magdalene may have well meant that she was a very, very central figure in the movement, even if not perhaps his wife. So in the Gospel of John, one of the things that it says is that in that Gospel, she's the only one that goes to the tomb and sees the empty tomb and then sees the risen Jesus and speaks with him, and then recounts what he told her to the apostles. Well, what he told her in the recounting is not listed in the New Testament. However, since the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and some other things called the Nag Hammadi library in Egypt, all of these in the late 40s, early 1950s, there's a number of Gospels, so-called, they're actually called that in the texts, that did not make it into the New Testament collection that purport to be, or have been, written by people in his ministry. Like we have, Gospel of Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, so on. That there's now Gospels of Philip, a Gospel of Paul, a Gospel of Mary Magdalene, another Gospel of Matthew, not a Gospel, but a letter from James, his brother James, in this collection called Nag Hammadi, because that was the town in Egypt where it was discovered. So I'm going to read you something that you may be familiar with already, but if you're not, I hope you find it interesting. It's going to be a bit longer because the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is actually quite short. A lot of it's missing. We know there was more of it because of other accounts describing it, but the texts that we found so far, the first at least 6 pages are missing, and then the pages we have after that, there's a number of pieces missing. So I'm going to read you some of the parts that we have. And this was, again, found in Upper Egypt. The original text of this was even predated the Nag Hammadi find. It was in 1896 by a German scholar named Karl Reinhardt. And that's actually in the Berlin Museum right now, that earliest piece of this Gospel of Mary Magdalene book. So this is from the fragments of found later in the 1949 or 50, whenever it was, with the Nag Hammadi discovery. So here we go, from the Gospel, supposedly written by Mary Magdalene, and in the intro to this, she's explaining what Yeshua taught her, that she was told after his death she was to pass on to the apostles. She had not revealed it up to that point, apparently, but she was to reveal these teachings to them, the 12 apostles, the men, after his death. And that may be part of what the Gospel of John was saying she recounted to them in private later. So here we go. And it starts in the middle of a sentence. Will the earth and all matter be destroyed or not? So somebody has put that question to Yeshua. He replied, all nature, all forms, all creatures exist within one another, and each one resolves at some point back to its own root. Those who have ears to hear, let him hear. That phrase should be really familiar if any of you have read the New Testament. Jesus said that a lot. Simon Peter then speaks to him. You have explained so many things to us. Explain this to us. What is the sin of the world? Yeshua replied, there is no sin. It is you who believe there is sin. When you do things against your own nature, like commit adultery or lie, that can be called sin. This is still Yeshua talking. These things are why God has come into your midst, to the very essence of your nature, so that it may be restored to its divine root. This sounds more like a mystical teaching, doesn't it, than traditional Christianity? At least it does to me. Excuse me. Then he continued, he being Yeshua, this is why you become sick and why you die. You have been deprived of that which can heal you. Any of you who seeks to understand, let him understand. Matter has given birth to passions without equal. They are contrary to your divine nature. They disturb the whole body. That is why I have said to you over and over, and this next part does appear a great deal in the New Testament, be of good courage and do not fear. If you have ears to hear, then hear. Then he greeted all of them, saying, peace be with you. Receive my peace into yourself. Another standard greeting among the apostles in the first century, but also among Jews in general, in that, not just in that era. It's still fairly common, but in 100 BC to 200 AD or so, very common Jewish greeting to one another. Shalom Alechem or Shalom Alecha, depending on whether it's singular or plural people. Beware that no one leads you astray by saying, the Son of Man is here, or the Son of Man is there, or the Son of Man is coming. Have any of you who grew up in a church ever heard any of those things? Beware of this, because I tell you the Son of Man is within you. Again, very mystical teaching about this indwelling spark, divinity, soul. It is the Son of Man within you that you are to follow, and all those who seek him sincerely will find him. Once you have found him, then go forth and preach the good news of the Father's kingdom. So, kind of gives a different slant on the good news of the kingdom, that the good news is that this lives in us and that we can find it. Do not lay down rules to anyone beyond those I appointed for you. Do not be like lawyers, straining and testing at the law. Once he had said these things, he departed, and they felt grieved, and they began to weep. How are we to go to the Gentiles and preach the gospel of the kingdom of the Son of Man? They did not spare him, they certainly will not spare us. Then Mary Magdalene stood up, spoke to them all, and said, My brothers, do not weep. Do not be afraid. His grace will be with you entirely. Rather, let us praise his greatness, for he has trained us and prepared us for this task. And once Mary had said this, their hearts began to turn to the good, and they began to remember more of the words of their Savior. Then Simon said to Mary, Sister, we know that the Lord loved you more than all the rest of us and above any other woman. So here's that same idea again that's in the Gospel of Philip. Tell us what the Savior has taught you, things that we may not have heard. Mary then answered, What is hidden from you that he has revealed to me, I will now share with you. And she spoke these words. The Lord said this to me. Excuse me. And then, there's a section of the text missing. Wouldn't it be nice to have that? After this missing text where she reveals what he said, Andrew then says to the other apostles, Say what you believe, say what you want about what she's just revealed. I, for one, do not believe it. I do not believe our Savior told her this. I do not believe he taught her this. These are strange ideas. I think he's not alone in thinking that. If you presented this, well, many people in more traditional churches, positions of authority, do reject this gospel entirely, in fact, as a fabrication. Simon Peter asked the same question. Did he really speak privately? Get this. Did he really speak privately to a woman and not openly to us, meaning the men apostles? Are we now to start listening to her and following her? Mary began to softly weep and said to Simon, My brother, what do you think? Do you think I made all this up? Do you think I'm lying about my beloved? Then Matthew Levi answered and said to Simon, You have always had a hot temper. I see you contending against women as if they are adversaries. If Yeshua has made her worthy, why do you reject her, and who are you to do so? Surely she knows him better than anyone. Kind of another hint there at the closeness of her relationship with Yeshua. This is still Levi talking. The hated tax collector, by the way, among the apostles, who formed a real bond with Mary Magdalene because she was not initially acceptable among them either. So Mary Magdalene and Matthew Levi were very close to one another. This is still Levi talking. That is why he loved her more than all of us. We should be ashamed of our treatment of her. We should put on the perfect inner man as he commanded us and begin to teach the good news and not lay down any other rules upon her or anyone beyond what he taught. Having heard this, their hearts softened, and they began to commit one by one to go forth to proclaim and preach his teachings to the world. So that's the fragment we have of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which does show some different levels of understanding and rivalry and contention among the apostles, and certainly among the apostles of Mary Magdalene, which if she were a woman apostle, that would have been very unusual in that time. The fact that Yeshua even had women traveling with him was an object of scorn and something very unusual, because Orthodox men and women did not travel together unless they're husband and wife. One more indication, by the way, that maybe she was. It was unseemly to do that, and women were not in positions of authority in Judaism at that time. There were no women priests. There were no women scribes. Women could not own property in first century. Women actually, many of the laws treated them as if they were property. Women could not sue for divorce, only men could. Women could not contest divorces. Women could not testify in courts of law. It was a very different time back then. So the fact that there's these women in prominent positions in Yeshua's work was really unique back then. And even some of the apostles, according to some records, not in the Bible as such, but in some outside records, historical and spiritual, some of them seemed to have issues with that, as this kind of shows. So anyway, there's other writings about Mary Magdalene in some of these other outside the New Testament Gospels that were found later. And as far as dating, by the way, most of these Gospels date to 2nd century, which seems like, oh gosh, that's 100 years after Jesus. Well, guess what? Our Gospels are pretty close to that, the 4 Gospels of the New Testament. The earliest one, I think, was written probably 50 AD, so that's 50 years after Jesus. The later ones were written somewhere between 70 and 100 AD, and some of Paul's letters and some of these, like the Gospel of Thomas, date back to that same era as the Gospel of John. Some of them definitely date later, clearly into the 2nd century, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're false. And for example, some first century well-known Christian figures, like Clement, or not Clement, who's 2nd century. Anyway, some very well-known 1st and 2nd century figures like Origen and Clement of Alexandria and some others, and Josephus, the historian actually, also refer to some documents that the earliest documents we now possess were from 2nd and 3rd century, but they're mentioned in 1st century. So they existed, the documents we have are older copies, but apparently in some form, maybe not that identical form, they existed before that. So anyway, some people have been asking about a little bit about Mary Magdalene, and I haven't done anything in a class on her in a very long time, so I thought, we'll take a little bit to just kind of touch the surface of that. Also, I do want to say, if you're interested in her and look her up, there's a tremendous amount of research that has been and is being done on her from archaeological standpoint, from historical standpoint, and from religious texts standpoint. There's also a lot of material out there on her that's in the New Age category, that's so-called channeled material, meaning somebody believes they have tuned into her energy or her spirit or her soul and are receiving information from her that then they write down and put in YouTubes or books or whatever. So when you do study this, and I'm not discounting all that, I'm not saying that none of that can be so. I am saying that to be discerning in what you take in as real, wherever it's from, some of the New Agey things that I've seen written about her are absolutely contradictory to everything we know about her biblically and historically. So is that just somebody's imagination and not really, And again, certainly connecting with her soul is possible. Certainly getting inspiration from a higher source that hasn't been written somewhere in the Bible is certainly possible. So I'm not saying none of that can be true, but just be discerning in what you're researching and be clear in your own mind, whether you're looking at historical textual basis or archaeological finds, or whether there's no substantiation whatsoever, which again does not mean it couldn't be true, but just be conscientious about the sources and what you're looking at. So if you are interested in looking at some of the historical, textual, archaeological information, there's a gentleman named Dr. James Tabor, Tabor. Kind of unique because there's a Mount Tabor in Israel, and it was one of the largest Essene settlements in the time of Jesus, and this expert on first century is named Tabor, so it's kind of fun. But James Tabor has a lot of wonderful material if you want to look up any more of that kind of thing. So where I'm going to go from here is to move into the meditation with just one more little thought, and that is that they're contrary to the way we may look at things now. There was never a unified understanding of Yeshua, where everybody understood him in the same way, believed the same things about him, thought the same things about him. And even among his apostles, they had different levels of understanding, different levels of inner realization and experience, different attitudes toward women. Some were very open and accepting them being an authority, some were very resistive. Some were very resistive to Yeshua and some of his ideas, and some were trying to control and manipulate him into being the political Messiah they wanted him to be, which he clearly wasn't. So there was never a complete harmony of understanding among them, just as there isn't today. All of us here, if we really had a discussion about something like exactly what do you think happens after death, or exactly what you believe about reincarnation, or exactly what you believe about Yeshua, they wouldn't be identical. There'd be variances, and hopefully we'd be able to have those variances in a welcoming environment where we consider one another's experiences and opinions respectfully and not hostilely. But it wouldn't mean even so that we would necessarily agree or come to agreement. We are unique and we see things differently, and it's always been like that. So it's not a new thing. And also, just be aware that if your understanding, if your experiences are uncommon, they're outside the norm in your synagogue or your church or your spiritual community, pay attention to that and don't automatically assume you're right and everybody else is wrong, or assume you're the awakened one and you're just waiting on everybody else to catch up with you. I would suggest you avoid that. But at the same time, so give some stock to other people's. They may be their understanding and perspective may be able to tweak yours into a greater refinement, and vice versa. But don't discount something you have a very strong inner knowing of or an inner experience of, just because someone else doesn't. Coming to trust what in this document is called the inner Son of Man. Coming to trust that's an important part of our journey. So let's just take a few minutes to go into silence and begin to connect with that part of us that I usually refer to as the soul. You might call it the indwelling of God, or the spark of God, or the Christ presence. Or we have different ways of describing indescribable spiritual experiences. But that inner being at your core that you are, let's let everything else kind of fade into the background for the next few minutes. Our particular thoughts and ideas, our particular confusion, if we have some, our resistance or insistence that it be a certain way. Let's just kind of let all that gently fall away behind us and bring our attention present to that, the simplicity of that pure being that you are, this pure expression of the divine, this living soul, let's say. And as we focus on the single simplicity of our divine nature, of this being that we are, not just the person that we are, let the peace that resonates within that being and the joy and wonder that lives within that being and that boundless loving essence, which is the core of our being. Let that just come fully alive in you. And anything less than that, just don't hold on to for right now. Let it be. And in this innermost place of pure life, of pure love, of pure peace, be restored, be rested, be at ease. This is the part of you that the world cannot touch or damage. This is the part of you that stays with you through the doorway of death. Just allow the radiance of that inner presence to flood your entire consciousness, your entire mind, entire heart, entire body. And may we just sit with this Holy Spirit in quiet for a few minutes together. Let's just begin to slowly bring our attention back once more. Shema Koli, hear my voice. I am. Shema Koli, hear my voice. I am. Hear my voice. I am. Shema Koli, hear my voice. I am. Shalom. I'm going to read you one part one more time. Peace be with you. Receive my peace unto yourselves. Beware that no one lead you astray by saying, lo, it is here, or lo, it is there. For the Son of Man is within you. Follow after him. And all those who seek him sincerely will find him. Then you may go and teach the good news of the kingdom. So, when we hear different people teach, we can think that it's about the words they say. And if they say the right words, it's a good thing. If they don't say the right words, it's not a good thing. Or if they're very skillful, it's good. And if they're kind of bumbling, it's not so good. But from the spiritual perspective, at least as Yeshua taught it, the people, when we hear people teach, there are people that do so with authority, and we can feel, in some sense, we can recognize that authority. And that authority is not some hierarchical authority. That authority is the genuineness of what they have awakened within themselves. And they're speaking from that deep place of knowing in themselves. And it carries a spiritual authority. It's something that was commented upon a lot about Yeshua in the New Testament by people who heard him, even by his adversaries sometimes, that he spoke with a very rare authority. So if we can find people to study with that speak with some of that authority, it's a real blessing. And some of you I know are in leadership positions or growing into leadership positions, or some have long been in leadership positions. Those of you who have those positions, be cognizant when you're teaching to come from that place as fully and as often as you can. I'm speaking to myself, of course, too. And if you are not able to come from that place, or unsure that you are coming from that place, then often better to be silent. The world has enough opinions. It has enough, well, I think this. Well, you're free to think that, and it's lovely if you're just having an opinion discussion. That's great. You know, those are fun. They're mentally engaging, and that's all fine. But if you really are looking for solid spiritual teaching, or are looking to present a solid spiritual teaching, then opinions of that kind, of things that arise from our minds, and especially ones that are defended by our ego, are not helpful. I heard somebody not long ago say that, are you aware that your role is not to defend your beliefs? Your role is to embody them, which I thought was a wonderful teaching. And so it's kind of what I'm saying is, for those of you who are in spiritual positions of leadership, do your best to come from that place of connectedness inside, where you really are in touch with that inner Son of Man, as Yeshua said in this passage. Really coming from that holy place within you, and not some other place of emotional reactivity or mental gyrations or whatever, which we all have. But to when you're in that space, try to abstain from teaching, so that your teaching can be as holy as possible. And we all certainly have limits, but from as genuine a place as you can. Emerson, who's somebody I really, really respect a lot, and I love his writings. Emerson once said, in our light hours, we should impart, meaning to give forth that light and that teaching. And then he said, but in our darker hours, let's just abstain, meaning, just not add more jumble to the confusion. So, thank you all for joining me tonight. May you have a blessed week, and may you be a blessing in this week. Thank you all for being with me. I say this a lot, I know, but I really very much appreciate your sharing these with me, and I hope you know that. And it's I don't know the right words, but I'm grateful that you find something of value here, that you keep showing up. So thank you. Love you all. I'm going to quit the record. This is being recorded, by the way. It'll be up on our YouTube, One by One YouTube channel. If somebody misses it and wants to hear it, or for some reason you want to hear it again. Anyway, love you all. Hope to see some of you Sunday at Unity. Have a great week. Bye for now.